Welcome back to the Why podcast from London Business School, where we look deep into the decisions shaping modern business and ask, why? I'm your host, Katie Pisa. Today we're asking, why does the office still matter? After years of remote and hybrid experimentation, many companies are pulling employees back into physical offices. But what are they really returning to? A productivity enhancer? A cost center? A culture builder? To help us examine the surprising power of place, I'm joined by Dr. Bukky Oyedeji, whose new review maps decades of research on how ambiance, space, and design influence everything from motivation to market valuation. So, Bukky, it's really great to have you here today for the Why podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Katie. Mm-hmm.
So many things that you've done that are really of interest. And just maybe you can fill us in a little bit more. I know you were trained as an architect, but now your research is looking at how office space affects how we work, and so many interesting points of your research that I'd like to discuss with you today. But the title of this podcast is, Why Does the Office Still Matter? And I think you can answer a lot of these questions. We have had years of remote and hybrid working, and many companies are now telling us we need to go back into physical offices. Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, can you just tell me a little bit about your research and how you thought about doing this, how it all evolved?
So my research currently, this stream of research looks at how the design of physical work environments combine with attributes of workers to affect performance. So I take a very macro, firm level perspective on how what I consider to be a complementary resource, which is the work environment itself, begins to affect some of these intermediate processes that happen in organizations to now eventually affect the performance of the firm. And this began really, believe it or not, based on my experience when I was still a practicing architect. Many times we would be in conversations with firm leaders, managers who want to redesign their space for one reason or another, maybe some sort of external reason might have motivated it, maybe they grew or something. But the way I was trained and the approach I took to it when I had my practice was to make sure I first of all understood the organization, its intent and its purposes, its highest and best aspirations for the next 5 years. What do you want your competitors to think about you? Truly understand the organization before ever drawing a line on paper. And the unfortunate thing that kind of occurred that I saw a pattern over time is many managers are always so cost focused. At the end of the day, some of the spaces we create that we know will enhance the spatial experience for the workers are taken out of the design whenever we're trying to cut costs. And as much as we tried to communicate that these are really important spaces, they are not wasted spaces, and they have implications. Like intuitively, we know they have implications for the eventual outcomes of the firms. We didn't, as an architect, at least for me at the time, didn't have the language or the data to back up those claims. And so it was a point of frustration that I experienced as an architect before I found my way into strategic management, where I now eventually acquired the tools that were necessary to be able to make those comparisons and communicate these ideas to firm managers.
So your experience as an architect and your frustrations and seeing what people weren't getting right actually led to your research ultimately.
Yes.
Which is, I guess, a great way of coming about it. It's unusual because here at London Business School, we have a lot of academics who have a lot of research, but maybe haven't necessarily worked in the field like you have. So how useful
that
your experience actually led to your research. It was a very natural
Yes. When I started studying strategic management, however, it wasn't very evident to me at the beginning that there was going to be this overlap. I had other problems while trying to run my firm, and the problem I had at the time was trying to understand how a firm manages to grow if it's knowledge intensive, if workers can just leave whenever they could, which was something I was experiencing as a young firm owner trying to grow an architectural practice. So this was part of the question that motivated me to go get a degree in strategy. And while I was doing that, I realized that they were having all these conversations about how companies can generate great value from their human capital. Nobody was talking about the spatial container, and I say that in quotes, within which all this activity goes on, and nobody was thinking about the impact it could actually have in terms of increasing or decreasing the value that is created.
And we were seeing sort of turnover or, staffing issues yourself.
Yes.
So this made you think, how can I make this a more attractive place? How can I retain people through making the environment a better place to be?
Yes,
okay.
Definitely.
Which is something, actually, it's really interesting and very topical, because now I think we talked about this when you did an article for Think here at London Business School. A recent report by KPMG said that by 2026, 65% of companies are expecting their employees to be back 5 days a week.
Yes.
So I wondered if you could touch on that. First of all, do you think that's still true? Do you think by next year a lot of places will say, that's it, you're back in the office?
So honestly, I want to say yes, but to a great extent, 65% sounds about right to me, because there are firms that are definitely going to be born digital, meaning they're born virtual anyway. They've designed their work processes in such a way that everything, their value creation process, everything is going to be remote, and they can work and function well as a 100% remote organization. But there are others that will not, that already existing and cannot, by virtue of their value creation process and the value proposition they bring to the market, they have to be in the office at some point in time or the other. I see that as a possibility. So back in 2020, when the articles started coming out, the office is dead, the office as we know it is gone, blah, blah, blah. I never believed it for 1 second, because I knew that the physical work environment, the idea of co-location, and it isn't just co-location for the sake of co-locating, but co-locating in a way that supports the value proposition of the firm, provides these very valuable intangibles that were not being considered at the time.
Okay.
One mindset most people had was how easy it felt for companies that were already existing to just switch to remote and hybrid work, and people saw an increase in productivity at the time. But that was because these people had been co-located in the past. They had developed relationships. They had the kind of things that being in the same space affords you. You already know, you already built relationships of trust and, and confidence. You understand the nuances of a particular, colleague. So if you now shift that already existing relationship from being in person to virtual, there's a lot of nonverbal cues that you already understand that aids that relationship. And very quickly, within about a year, we started seeing articles emerging saying, you know what, we're having trouble with new workers, people who are coming in straight from the university, graduates
during the pandemic
who were being onboarded but were not feeling integrated into the organization or didn't have the opportunity to learn the intangibles, right? There's certain, to every work that we do, there's the clear-cut codified work, which we talk about, and then there's the tacit aspect to it. Like, how do you handle a certain situation? How do you, by virtue of being beside a senior colleague, you kind of learn how to answer certain questions, how to talk to clients and things like that.
It's interesting because I did the last podcast with a faculty who was talking about hybrid work can be advantageous at times as well because of conflict, and that's a separate conversation. So there's a flip side to this.
Yes, there definitely is. And that's why one of the things we emphasize from the research that I've been looking at really is that making that it's important to fine-tune the physical environment to the work process. Some of the advantages of hybrid work or being able to work remotely was for people with disabilities who didn't have to deal with all the barriers that
just
sort of
getting
exist,
to
both
work,
physical
commuting
and
in a big city like London, where there maybe aren't great opportunities to travel. And
so people found those advantages. Some minorities who have trouble just being able to integrate within an organization could simply focus on the work itself and get the work done. But at the same time, there were other downsides that were being found where if you do remote work and you're a minority for too long, female, different ethnic origin, you may get forgotten. You lose visibility and you don't get to form those relationships that could be pivotal for your promotion or for your growth, career growth within the organization. So
I wanted to ask you, it's more than just a desk. You've told us why. But what are some examples of how each dimension, say lighting, you talk a lot about ambiance, the desk layout, the spatial impact of work, and the color scheme, the aesthetic. How does that impact the employee experience?
So we say there are three basic dimensions through which a space is experienced, not just the physical work environment, but we use that to structure the research on physical work environments. So first is the ambience, which is how the space feels, the atmospheric conditions, the lighting, the air quality, the temperature, humidity, what have you, how that affects your comfort, which has implications for physiological processes and can then affect psychological factors. Then there's the spatial configuration, where the desks are located, where the rooms are, where the walls are, the height of the walls, the adjacencies, what room is near the other, and how that can begin to affect movement, visibility, and accessibility, with strong implications for how the work gets carried out. And then finally, we have the aesthetic dimension, which most people kind of think, oh, you're just trying to make things look pretty, but it goes way beyond that, because it can, beyond just being aesthetically pleasing, which is good for your emotional psyche generally, but it does a lot more than that in terms of conveying an identity. It can say what the firm is about, what you yourself are about. It determines the first impression. It can help you reinforce your culture, and so many other intangible resources that matter to a firm's performance, but that we don't necessarily always think about. And now those three dimensions, of course, I'm drawing from my former background as an architect. I'm still licensed, by the way, in the state of Texas. I draw from that because that's how we try to understand space. All three of them work together to help you conceptualize and experience space in a very full sensory and structural manner. But by taking those three dimensions and trying to sort through all the research that's been out there across several disciplines, just so that we can get a clearer understanding of the impact of physical work environments on a firm's eventual outcome. Using those helped us to create some sort of scaffolding where we could now integrate the different pieces of research together, so we could come out with those two key themes that emerged at the end of the research.
Bukky, can you just explain in your research which areas did you address? Is there a specific geographical area that you look at, or is it widespread?
Yeah, it was definitely very widespread. The kind of criteria we used in terms of selecting the papers that we reviewed or that we included in the overall research really was any kind of research at all that looked at organizational phenomena and the office. So we looked at research that came from environmental psychology, research from architecture, urban design, definitely research in management, marketing, social psychology, cognitive psychology, any of these sorts of disciplines that kind of examined office workers and any kind of phenomena that was related to organizational outcomes was what we were used. So we just used those three dimensions, the ambience, spatial configuration, and aesthetics, to kind of organize these very disparate research that was across various disciplines into a coherent theme.
You argue that the office affects both internal and external stakeholders. Could you discuss that a little bit more?
Yes, thank you so much. So one of the things that we found from the review was that there was this strong emphasis on internal stakeholders. And when we talk about internal stakeholders, we're usually just thinking about the employees and maybe the top management team, the CEO and the suite and everything. And very few thought about the external stakeholders. And by external stakeholders, we're talking about the clients. We're talking about investors. We're talking about analysts. We're talking about the community, the immediate community within which the firm's physical location is situated. Okay. And so we looked at both of them, and of course we were able to find that for internal stakeholders, the employees, it affects their work processes. It also has psychological and physiological impact on employees as well, beyond the actual work that was getting done. But for external stakeholders like clients, potential hires, investors, we saw that it played a very important role in the kind of impressions they formed about the firm. In fact, there was one particular study that comes to mind where, by virtue of just looking at pictures of the reception area of different medical offices, respondents came to conclusions on the quality of care they think they would receive from those physicians, which is really mind-blowing when we think that, when it comes to health outcomes, your perception, your satisfaction with the care you've received can actually have impact on how well you feel after that as well.
Have any hospitals noted that and said, it's funny, you mentioned that. Someone recently was just saying, I hate going to the doctor because when you walk into a hospital, particularly, there's certain ones that have that smell, that feel, that already make you feel sick before you've seen the doctor.
Yeah.
So you've looked at the medical field as well.
Yes, definitely. So a lot of the research that comes out of environmental psychology does a lot of work in the medical field. In fact, one of the early studies that I came across this, I think I was probably maybe just the third year into my career as an architect at the time, was looking at hospitals and was looking at the surgical wing of that hospital, and what they did at the time was to compare patients who were in rooms without a view of nature versus patients who were in rooms with a view of nature. And the next level to that was patients who didn't have a view of nature but had a picture on the wall showing nature. And they found impact on their rates of recovery, with those who had a view of a natural woodland outside of the window recovering the fastest, followed by those who had pictures of nature, and the lowest was the people without
that sterile operating
just very sterile institutional
medical institutional.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating. I did not realize you'd worked in medical spaces, but obviously that's very important and probably very rewarding work to be able to do.
Yes, it is. Yes, I remember I was very intrigued by it at the time, but I was just early in my career.
I think you still have. There's still a lot you can offer there.
There's so much to still be
Having
done.
just been to a couple of doctors myself, it really does impact you. Like just your feeling when you walk in the room to see a doctor, when you've been sitting in a hot, stuffy, horrible room with no windows and no nature.
Yes. And it sets the expectations even with your clients as well. One of the other studies from the review process also was about this professional services firm whose name I'm not going to mention now, but they had just redesigned and created these additional spaces where the consultants could sit with the clients. And they had the clients rate their perception of this professional services firm at the end of the day. And it turns out that those who were in offices, the same firm but different layouts across their organizations in different branches, and the spaces that had these clearly designed and articulated space for client and consultant interaction were rated much higher than those that just had a basic reception and then were taken into a meeting room. So, it's still, a meeting room is still a place where you meet with your client, but because of the intentionality of the purpose-designed space, those clients had better impressions of those firms than the other.
The design was taking the client into space, into thinking when building this space, and it's reflected in how they feel going there. So overall, it's going to boost business and
yes, because
Why should firms treat their physical space as part of their strategy rather than just logistics? You've touched on some of that.
Yes. So let's go back with the external stakeholders. Let's start from there first.
Okay.
See, so some of those spaces, like I said, can signal credibility, right? Another research comes to mind right now of where respondents were shown pictures of different, again, medical practices. So one was a newly built hospital medical practice, very modern design, very forward thinking. Another was a prison, an old prison building that had been converted into a medical practice. And another was in like a typical shopping mall, strip mall kind of location. And they had respondents rate those and assess how the extent to which they'll think they'll get good quality care and the expertise of the medical professionals. And clearly the one that the design of the building looked innovative, contemporary, forward thinking was ranked the highest. Now, so to the extent that your physical space can convey your strategy or can convey strategic intent, or your partners, business partners, potential hires, clients can form mindsets or impressions about how good you are at your work, then your physical environment becomes a strategic tool. So what this is saying is that the way your space is designed can affect what your clients think about you and your expertise.
It sets the bar for
that,
the impression
right?
you want to
and
give.
the extent to which they might want to do business with you if they're coming for the first time, right?
Okay.
And then we see the impact on potential hires as well, right? So if an employee comes in, looks around and says, oh, this space is very innovative, is very creative, I am an innovative and creative person, then I want to be in this organization. That can already tip the scale in your favor without you even, pulling all the typical levers that HR managers pull in terms of your benefits and pension contribution, etc., right? And if it also begins to affect the internal stakeholders, your employees, where from the space they can see that given the way it's been laid out, you really do care about us. Oh, there is a space in here where I can have a quiet time when I need it. There's a space in here where I can, the kitchen is very centrally located, and so I get to talk to a lot of people if you're an outgoing person. That can also help your retention. So not only is it affecting the quality of talent you can hire, it's affecting the quality of talent that you can retain, it's affecting the kind of clients you can attract, and it can also affect how the community feels about you. So for all intents and purposes, your physical work environment is a strategic tool, is a strategic asset that should be thought about when being implemented, rather than being thought about as a logistical tool or something in your facilities management budget, which unfortunately many firms still do.
Is it just because of cost that they don't, or are they still just hesitant about this and they don't believe the research? Why doesn't everyone buy into this?
Well, thank you for saying that. And this is part of this is a big gap that my research, along with my authors, were kind of trying to fill now. There's a slight disconnect somewhere. So a lot of the research, so many firms may not think about this because they just really don't know. Many firms have not been made aware. Many of them think about it as just something you do to look nice, but they don't think about how it can have impact on the bottom line.
So they think of it as more PR rather than an actual thing they should do that's good for them.
Yeah, that actually affects the work. From the research we said it affects task accomplishment, how the work gets done, which is your productivity, very important.
Sure.
And then your resource position along 3 dimensions, which hopefully we'll get to talk about later. But the other part of it that kind of creates this issue is that most of the research, when you look in environmental psychology, they are interested, the outcome for environmental psychologists is how does it make people feel? So they look at the design of the space and how it makes people feel. It's strategic management that cares about outcome at the firm level, firm performance. How does this affect profitability, right? So that link from how it makes people feel to profitability, not many of the fields that study this really focus on that. So maybe some of the research we look at in marketing might look at how the layout of the store, or where things are located, or how much lighting is in the store affects the buying habits of the consumers, which begins to begins to get to some sort of performance outcome. But then again, it's all about the behavior of the individual and not necessarily the overall firm performance outcome at the firm level, which is what strategy is about. So me, along with my colleagues and those of us who are beginning to do more work in this area, are now trying to make that link. Right, some of the research in organizational behavior looks at layouts and then talks about how does it make people feel as well. So now we're trying to say it's not just we don't want to just end on how people feel. We're saying, how does the space make people feel? How does it affect their behaviors? How do these eventually affect the overall performance of the firm? So we're here to make that complete link. And in practice at the time, all I had as an architect who had some inclination for environmental psychology was how the space would make the workers feel. And unfortunately, some managers don't necessarily prioritize how people feel. All they care about is the bottom line. How does this affect
KPIs.
my profit and loss at the end of the day? And so hopefully we are able to make that connection now.
Which leads nicely on to, I was going to next ask you about, physical environments, how they influence employees' ability to do their jobs, and what your research says. What does it say about different layouts? And one thing you talk a lot about is open plan offices, how that affects focus and stress levels.
So from the research, anyway, from this review, we found that, okay, physical work environments affect task accomplishment, but it does so in three ways. It affects the physical and mental health of the workers, which we've kind of talked about already. It affects the motivation and attitudes, their willingness to do their best job, right? And then it also affects the work process itself, meaning things like collaboration, communication, knowledge sharing, willingness to mentor another junior employee. The big debate about open plan versus private offices and things like that. So that takes us to the work processes. Let's narrow down on work processes. Now, depending on the value creation process, what's the value proposition that the firm is bringing to the market? Are you positioning yourself as a firm that is differentiating, that is innovative, pushing the boundaries? Or are you positioning yourself as a cost leader? You're very efficient in the way you use your resources to bring value to your customers. Depending on what that key value proposition is, how you design your space to support the work processes that lead to those outcomes should differ. I'm coming back to the open plan somehow. Okay. So for a firm, for example, that positions itself as innovative, that is trying to differentiate in the market, that's trying to push the boundaries, that means that the generation of new ideas is critical to your value creation process. And so as a result of that, you really want to be able to encourage certain types of behaviors, like the collaboration, the spontaneous encounters, sharing of ideas. And if you're going to do that, then you probably need a kind of spatial layout that supports that, which is what the open plan layout is supposed to do. Right?
But can I interrupt? Because you talk in your research a little bit about how open plan can be great, but it also can be a real disadvantage.
Yes.
Noise and people who need to focus and things. So
yes.
It sounds like there's some new ideas that you're proposing.
Yes, and that's kind of where it's going. So there's tasks that require focus and concentration, and there are those that require a lot of interaction. Now, the challenge that most firms are facing is that they create one type of space to serve both purposes. Right. And to the extent that there is a misalignment with the strategic position in terms of differentiation, cost leadership, and the behaviors and the space, then it wouldn't work for you. And so I always feel very sorry for workers who have had to leave their private offices and they were thrown into this unassigned hot desking environment. Yes. Who are struggling to do focused work. Yes. So the solution, and it's not a perfect, when I say solution though, I'm not saying it's a one size fits all, is really maybe to create, we're seeing the emergence of these sort of spaces that are like activity-based workspaces.
So you might have hot desking, but you might have some tables where you can have meetings.
Yes.
And maybe some partitions, but not closed-in office spaces.
Yes, so different types of spaces where the workers can carry out different tasks at different times. Okay. So even for a person whose work is very collaborative, you still have moments of time where you need to focus. So you need to focus, then you can either go into a booth. We used to call them, in practice, I used to call them huddle rooms, but something like some sort of private. We have some person. Here. Yes.
Yeah, so if you need a call that you need privacy.
Exactly.
Else, it's,
you're
hiring someone or interviewing someone. Or
you can go in there. Or if you would just really want to focus, you don't want anybody to interrupt you, you can go in there at that point in time. Okay. But you can also have the other types of spaces for small group activities, big group idea generation or ideating rooms, as we used to call them, sort of places, flexible furniture that can allow you to make it, maybe this area is a small group right now it's a big group. Creating that sort of flexibility and giving the workers personal control helps that. Okay. But if your work requires a lot of focus and you've been thrown into an open plan, then you're going to experience a lot of noise, visual distraction, a lot of overstimulation, which then results in, annoyance. It affects your mood, it affects your attitude, it affects your physiology, can make some people sick, especially if they have invisible disabilities, people who are sensitive to noise and things like that. So that's some of the challenges we've been seeing with that. So it's not that open plan layouts are generally bad, but when they are not thoughtfully designed to align with the strategic direction of the firm or the strategic intent of the firm, then you create this misalignment that becomes very costly on all the dimensions we've mentioned earlier.
We like to ask each of our guests a signature question. So, Bukky, today I'd like to ask you, why should organizations still care about the design of their physical workspaces? And what's one action they can take tomorrow to improve this?
So I think organizations should still think about and care deeply about their physical work environment, even in this age of hybrid work, because it really isn't just a passive container. Whether or not firms know it, your physical space is signaling something both to their workers, the internal stakeholders, and to the people who are on the outside, clients, investors, and the immediate community society, the external stakeholders. And to the extent that whether or not the firms know it or whether or not they are curating that messaging, it has great implications. So your space is not just a container, it's a communicator. It has implications for communication within your firm and to external stakeholders. It has implications for your culture, which is where it reinforces, which is where culture is reinforced, right? In the age of hybrid work now, where most people are working at home, when we come to the office, the role that the office plays is even more salient, more poignant, because this is where it's now a high impact touch point where you can reinforce what your culture is, you can reinforce who you are as an organization, you can redefine identity, you can help the workers feel like they belong in a tangible way. And for any firm leader or any worker, team leader that is listening to this right now, one thing they can do immediately is to take a step back. When next you go into your office, take your lens off as a leader or as a worker within the space and begin to walk through and view and experience the space from the perspective of an outsider. Ask, what does this space say about the firm? What does this layout say about our values? What does this suggest about our culture? And do these things that you think you can derive from them, do they align with your strategic intent? Do they align with your strategic direction? Does it align with your strategic position? To the extent that there is a misalignment, then a rethink needs to be done and potentially a redesign, reorientation needs to occur.
That's great advice. Ideally, they'd be thinking about this way before they design the space.
Yes,
or
but
redesign
sometimes
the space.
Firms inherit spaces.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's true.
Yeah, that happens sometimes. They're like, okay, you guys have grown too much, or maybe a business unit.
So we're moving to another building on the campus, for example.
Yes.
So this kind of thing.
Yeah. So if it's already existing and it just, okay, now people think it's just about assigning seats,
Right.
But you can end up assigning seats and compromising productivity for the workers.
Thank you so much, Bukky, for being here today. I really enjoyed our conversation and I found everything you had to say so interesting and useful and practical for hopefully all of our listeners today.
Thank you very much, Katie, for having me. I've really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you for joining us for the Why podcast. Have you ever worked somewhere where the physical space helped or hurt your performance? Let us know by tagging us on social using #TheWhyPodcast. And don't forget to follow and subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. For more insights from London Business School, visit london.edu/thewhy.